You don't have to take on one system if it doesn't work for you. You have to kind of define what you want to accomplish. And the ethos of academic medicine, where you want to change the lives of people you will never meet, is something that really is fulfilling for me. And it's also the hope for people who have diseases that we don't treat very well.
Welcome to the Learn Skin podcast with me, Dr. Raja.
And me, Dr. Hadar, where we discuss all things skin.
Join us as we delve into the art and science of skin health in today's episode.
Hey, Raja, can you say the thing I told you to tell them?
Of course. We are board-certified dermatologists. This podcast is meant for educational and informational purposes only and is not considered medical advice, nor does it serve as a substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. All opinions shared do not express the views of Learn Health, Inc. Let's get to the good stuff.
Hey, Raja, how are you today?
Hey, Hadar, I'm doing pretty well. What are we talking about today? So many choices for when you graduate and what job to take, Hadar. It was like super straightforward, wasn't it?
Easy peasy. And they teach it first year medical school, I think, or in residency somehow. No, they never teach us what to do and how to make these decisions. It's so difficult. And, you know, when you graduate residency in dermatology, maybe in other specialties, I'm sure as well, there are many different options, different ways to think about how you want to build your practice, where you want to practice, how you want to practice, who do you want in your practice. So many different considerations. And we always complain that we don't get business training. But, you know, it's not just about the business and about medicine. It's about how to do this in a compassionate way. And I cannot think of a person with more compassion than our mystery guest, who was able to combine both his really amazing business attitude but also his compassion to patients. Shall we meet him?
Yeah, Hadar, on that note, we have so many colleagues, and today we have Dr. Iltefat Hamzavi, who I find is a real inspiration on many levels for the things that we want to do, whether it be research or he was with you on the HS Foundation for a long time. He is faculty at the Department of Dermatology at the Henry Ford Health System, directs the HS clinic. We know that's a devastating condition. We need more people that focus in on that. He's an expert in vitiligo. He's one of the folks that runs the Hamzavi Dermatology Specialists private practice, which has been very successful as well. So thanks for joining the podcast. We want to pick your brain today.
Well, nice to talk to Raja and Hadar, two of my favorite people in this universe. So I'm lucky to talk to you guys.
Let's just jump into it, because I know that I talk to a lot of our residents, and I know Raja does the same in California, and you were up in Detroit. What kind of questions do you get from residents, and how do they think about graduating? Can you maybe take us over some of the fears and anxieties that are presented to you on a daily basis?
Or even young dermatologists, let me add that in, even if you graduated, exactly. Sometimes you're still figuring it out.
Yeah, I think you figure out your whole career. So what are some of the anxieties? So one is everybody's in a little different position. So I think taking a large chunk, a lot of our residents are graduating with a lot of debt. So they have to take care of servicing the debt. And obviously they want to advance their equity and homes. They want to take care of their children's education. They have responsibilities to their parents or other things that they want to get done with their life. And they've deferred so much of this. So debt's an element. The ability to potentially practice with enough support. Do I have a scribe? Do I have enough MA support? Can they practice in a locale that is close to family or close to the areas that they enjoy? So geographic location is a factor. But I think the biggest factor, is finding a place where they enjoy working, where they can do the things that they enjoy among people they enjoy being with. So that culture, the support system, that overall ecosystem is a big concern. And I think when we had fewer choices, in some ways it was a little easier. There's a tyranny of choice, and I think they're in this phase where there's so many different options, but I don't think the clarity of the matrix of how to make these decisions is there. So what ends up happening is that all of these confounding elements kind of come together, and there is a little bit of anxiety and concern, but it's still derm, and we're a fun group, and people are overall doing fine. But those are some of the anxieties I hear about.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, I have to say, being in dermatology, still so thankful to be in a job that I just love from beginning to end and everywhere in between. It's pretty amazing. When it comes to different practice models, I mean, you have academics, first of all, and then you have like the big health systems. I know out in California, we have Kaiser, Sutter. I'm sure there are different health systems around the country. And then you also have private practice. And you've kind of got a unique position in that you have experience with several of these simultaneously. And I mean, I'm guessing all of us could chime in, but I really want to understand, how do you counsel people think through the pros and the cons? If you don't mind just walking through perhaps academics, a big health system that's not necessarily academics, a hospital system, and say private practice. What would be your conversation?
So I start off with a kind of overview, and there are two pains in life. I heard from an author once: the pain of doing what you're doing, or the pain of not doing what you want to do. And you have to reconcile those, because
Love it.
these are imperfect choices. Private practice, lots of advantages, lots of disadvantages. Academics, lots of advantages, disadvantages. Large healthcare systems, private equity, all have advantages and disadvantages. And they weren't created just because somebody wanted to create an academic exercise. They exist for a reason. And so you have to kind of navigate all those different areas as you try to figure out, what do I want to do? And the way I figured it out, and it's obviously very personal, and each of us is different, was I inherited a position in practice. My father was a dermatologist, and I love academic dermatology, and I couldn't really decide. And I tried to make myself useful to both sides, but I didn't want to leave one or the other. And so that's how I ended up here. But I also found that both systems can create a synergy. And I guess that's the point I think I can make, is you don't have to take on one system if it doesn't work for you. You have to kind of define what you want to accomplish. And the ethos of academic medicine, where you want to change the lives of people you will never meet, is something that really is fulfilling for me. And it's also the hope for people who have diseases that we don't treat very well. And then in private practice, you have the flexibility to kind of innovate in the realm of the staff. You have ownership options and a little more access to controlling payer mixes when they kind of get a little tougher. But neither one could satisfy all of us. And so again, which pain is worse for you? And then lastly, the one unique thing I found in our specialty, and maybe there's different people, but all the people I've met in our specialty almost overwhelmingly are very mission driven. We are health care. Care is why we do this. Yes, there are other needs, but fundamentally, if we get the mission of caring for people and we're fulfilled for that, most of us believe we're on this planet to kind of help others. And there's different permutations, but you have to figure out where you can maximize that mission. And where that takes you is kind of a personal decision. But again, it's not a clear dollars and cents issue. It's not a clear staffing issue. It's kind of a mix, a conglomeration of all those different areas. I don't know if that answers your question, but hopefully I'm trying to kind of lay out the matrix and decision points.
No, absolutely. And I think that makes a lot of sense, at least to me listening to you. I think this concept of going after a certain goal, what do you want to achieve? What do you want to accomplish? And then seeing what fits. And also, it's not one decision, one system that you got to be in. I mean, I think Roger can definitely speak to that as well, that you can do what you want to do, and you can mix and match different settings. We know a lot of practitioners who work one day in a large academic center and one day in a private practice, and kind of mix and match what they like from each of the models. So we're very fortunate to have that. One of the things that I like to tell people who ask me this question, if they care to hear my opinion, is talking about the dollars and cents. And I think, Ilt, you made a very good point about the debt that people carry. And I think it's a huge burden. It's a big elephant in the room. And every time we ignore it, we're doing disservice to our trainees. And one of the things that I like to do is to take out a piece of paper and ask the person in front of me, what do you actually need? Because we're very fortunate to be well compensated in dermatology, relatively speaking, compared to the time we need to invest. And I think that very quickly you realize that you can actually meet a lot of your financial goals very quickly. And that relieves at least some of the anxiety. I think people never get away from that anxiety until everything is paid. But generally speaking, it helps to relieve that a little bit and open their mind to see, well, I can actually get my goals accomplished. And the last thing I'll say about goals accomplished is when you actually do this, and that's why I started with the idea of being compassionate and caring physician, is that you really accomplish what you want to achieve in your career, and that helps you to carry longer. So I also treat that as more of a financial investment. If you don't want to, what we call now in the field, burn out, then you got to do what you're passionate about. And that is actually a smart financial investment, because you will be able to practice for 30, 40 years as opposed to burn out in 10.
That is very insightful. I think the point you made about taking out the piece of paper and deciding how much money you need and then being passionate about what you do, those occur simultaneously, maybe in sequence, but they have to occur also in parallel. And I got some advice when I finished my fellowship from David McLean when I was at University of British Columbia in Vancouver. He said, decide how much money you want to make and then work backwards. And everything else is gravy, but just decide how much money you need per month. And that's the same exercise I do with our trainees. I just did one, and we mapped out debt, we mapped out aspirations, we mapped out expenses, decided where they wanted to live, looked at the average home cost, educational cost, how much their debt was for servicing their debt for medical school and college, and then they went backwards. And exactly what you said, they became much more, it reassured them. But the harder task is knowing yourself. How do you become passionate about what you want to do? There is a hard reality of our basic needs, and sometimes being recognized is important to us. Sometimes being really wealthy is important to us. The one place I'll tell you will not be happy is when you are allowing others to define your goals. If you're publishing papers to supersede the competition, if you're trying to make more money than the dermatologist next door, you won't be happy. You have to define these goals a priori. As the Greeks would say, know yourself, and then you will know the world. And those are elements that you have to kind of work through. And I think physicians are trained in that morality, in that humanistic side of our field. The business people, they're trained very well in balance sheets and resource allocation and efficiencies. They'll run circles around us. But why are we doing what we're doing? And what can we do to relieve suffering? And how does that fit into our own sense of self? Those are questions you have to ask at the end of your training period. And then once you have that answered, you can find these passions. You can do so much in dermatology, both in the practice realms that we discussed, as well as creating your own practice realms. But if you get the dollars and cents out of the way, then figure out what is your purpose, what is the big thing you're trying to accomplish. The rest of it is a wonderful life. And I've never heard anybody say that investing in purpose and meaning and passion is actually a financially savvy move. Because if you can work in your 70s, 80s, you're not going to have too much debt. You'll be fine, even in Miami or New York City or Northern California. And you'll definitely be fine in Detroit, Michigan.
You know, these are such good points. And in your case, you have a private practice that has done, I think, well. And in this landscape right now where people really are looking too much at private practice, when did you make the decision to go into have a private practice? And you obviously have this academic appointment as well. What do you think are the advantages that you find in private practice? If you could speak to that. And then what were the specific advantages that you find with the academic center?
I love and engage in both, but I also kind of did not make an active choice. I'm of South Asian ancestry, and like all good South Asian kids, I did what my parents told me to do, and I went into dermatology. And my father was a dermatologist, and so I joined the practice. But I also loved the field of dermatology. I loved academia. I had an incredible experience at University of British Columbia with Harvey Louie and David McLean and all the faculty there, as well as at Wayne State and at University of Michigan. So, I really respected both sides. So as far as the private practice side goes, the pros are you possibly have upper limit of compensation that's higher than you can get in academia. But the lower limit is lower. So, you can start off at a lower position. And if you have a drive, you want to see a lot of patients, you want to be innovative, you want to do procedures, private practice might take you a little further, but your basement is also lower because if you don't have enough patients, if you're in a very competitive marketplace, you might make less. With private practice, you do have a little more control over your staffing if the group will allow you to, but it's in their incentive for you to see more patients. Private practice does give you a little more control of your payer mix. And payer mix, there is a reality to it, which is leaving aside the reimbursement access to formularies, the amount of paperwork you need to fill out, it does differ between some of the state-funded plans versus some of the private plans. So those are some of the things that you find. Intellectual property sometimes is a little bit better in private practice, not that you're going to generate that much, but sometimes you have complete control of the intellectual property, whatever you do. Academia has a lot of advantages: the camaraderie, the shared mission, the ability to be part of big projects with NIH funding or big pharma funding. It's a little bit better in academia. And then travel. There's a lot of opportunities to travel and meet people across the country, across the world, that you don't always get in private practice. But the reality is that all the things I just mentioned can overlap. There are many people who are doing very interesting intellectual property exercises in private practice. There are people who are doing very, very well in academic practice, doing lots of procedures. And then you can travel and go back and forth. But those lines are a little harder. The threshold is a little higher to do those things in each of those domains of private practice and academia. Legacy. It's very hard to have legacy investments in academia unless you can get intellectual property. You can't invest in real estate. You get a limited return on the passive revenue streams. So those are some of the limitations. But again, if you hit a jackpot on the IP, you have a major discovery, the upper limit now is very, very high in academia. So there are different ways of having passive revenue, but they're a little different.
You know, I have to say, you inspired me to even think about the hybrid model. And I love that you kind of painted this picture to just really highlight what the pros are. And gosh, do we even need to go into the cons? In any big bureaucratic system, there's bureaucracy. And in private practice, you got to deal with payers, right? So it's nothing is without its, good and bad. But I have to say, even personally speaking, I am so thankful for the academic world because it allows me to really understand the teaching side of things and fostering that sense of what I would say amazement to just say, hey, this is a career that's really amazing to spend your entire life doing. But gosh, and Hadar, maybe you're the only holdout here, but when I also moved from, not completely, from academics into the private world, I started to realize that, people say it's all acne. They said you're going to just be popping pimples all day, but that's totally not true. You see really interesting cases. I see actually personally a lot more skin of color now. We see some pretty advanced stuff. And the reason that I moved from the academic center was that so we could get access to what's known as Medi-Cal, which is the Medicaid in California. So gosh, I mean, the complexity of patients that I see is actually, believe it or not, gone up. And so I think it's a myth that you're only going to be popping pimples or whatnot. So, on that note, what do you think would be the biggest surprises or myths that people have about private practice that you think is not true or maybe is just a misconception?
So before I forget, one of the big pros of academia is teaching. The camaraderie and mentorship is really second to none. As far as other myths, you're absolutely correct. The complexity can be very, very high in private practice. The other myths that you get is that you can't have camaraderie. I mean, large groups can offer you a lot of camaraderie, and a lot of times the journal clubs can sometimes be very engaging. The other element of private practice that people will talk about is the ability to collaborate with other specialties. If you're part of a hospital group, if you're part of a network of physicians, the most surgeons collaborate with plastics and oncology all the time. The medical folks collaborate with rheumatology and medical because they're desperate to work with you. Pediatricians work with GI, Peds GI, and all the different groups. So you'll find that there is this collaborative element, and you have to create that network. Just like you have to do in academia too, but you got to find your core niche of people. So those are some of the things that I found. And then lastly, teaching. You can teach at the community programs. You can teach at the university programs if they need your services. So I think a lot of those things go by the wayside if you reach out for them.
Speaking of myths, this whole concept that the lines have blurred also leads to, just basically busting all these myths. I think one of the myths that I grew up on is that the way to be scholarly is to do research. And that means you got to stay in academics. And I think that now there's ways to be scholarly by doing research, but also stay curious and do teaching outside and lecturing, as well as conducting research in the private practice or be a leader. And I think both you, Ilt, and your leadership in vitiligo and HS, for example, Raja running a large clinical trials unit, private practice, are proving that all these are old myths and now everybody can do everything. You just got to think creatively about what you want to achieve, because I think that's much more open way, as Ilt described in the beginning, to think about your career. And then you can choose the different pieces from each of these practice models that will help to accomplish this and actually be successful, be scholarly, be compassionate, and yes, also make some money along the way. So I think those myths are old school stuff.
Don't you guys think that even if you look at research, even in academics, I mean, you can be scholarly within academics. It used to be that you had to do basic science research. And I still think that's what people get credit for. If you do clinical trials, usually that doesn't add to your promotion steps unless you get publications out of it. It's still one of those challenging areas where I don't think departments have quite figured out how to put clinical research into the mix unless it's like, some basic science related thing or you get a publication. But you can also be like a clinician scholar and you can still do a lot of teaching and report really interesting cases. Gosh, I think like case reports, a lot of them started from very, very astute clinicians who figured something out early and then from there blossomed all of these amazing kind of ideas. But you can be scholarly at any of these levels. Wouldn't you both agree to that, or any other thoughts on
Absolutely.
that?
Absolutely. I think we have a faculty member, Richard Huggins, who's done a tremendous job organizing patient support groups for vitiligo. I don't think we would have these advances and approvals in vitiligo without these patient support groups. And he helped organize one of the largest attendances at any FDA meeting for skin disease ever for the vitiligo community, partly because he had navigated so many challenges. And talk about advancing a field. I mean, getting an FDA approved medication is a
Yeah, no
tremendous
kidding.
effort. And Richard has gotten publications, but again, I agree with you, but we've got visionary chairs in Henry Lim and David Ozog, and they recognize the value of that. But you're right. At times, it's the publications publish or perish idea, which isn't valid. But the one thing I've heard, though, from both you and Adar is the ethos. There is a uniform ethos. That is, we are health care providers. We care about the health of people, the compassion, the care, and making money. But money is really just the sustainability of the project. That's a uniform ethos, and they're just different permutations of how to do it. But if you don't care about the mission, then this is going to be a very hard 20, 30 years for all of our graduates. If you love the
Yes.
mission, the world is going to be incredible for you.
Absolutely. And I wanted to touch a little bit about the ability to be a leader and to be active like you have been, Ilt. Can you describe how you got into this position? I know you're very knowledgeable on how to set up these foundations and how to make sure that they're successful. I know you taught me pretty much everything I know about that stuff. How did you get involved in that? And what opportunities exist for young dermatologists who are going out to the world right now?
It came out outside of medicine. So I'm of Muslim faith, and after 9/11, there were so many challenges of bigotry and inclusivity and finding a better place. And so I got involved in nonprofits to try to bring in immigrant children, Muslim Americans into the broader civic engagement space. And I had so much support from across all different faith categories and civic engagement. So I served on a couple of boards. I also served on some boards for the local school districts. And then those two realms allowed me to learn quite a bit. And then in one of the nonprofits I was working with, we got a large grant. And large foundations really improve so much of society. And they forced us to take all these classes on governance, on how to take very limited resources and make advances. And so I learned through that process. And there's organizations such as the Center for Nonprofit Advancement, Board Source, and other groups that you can take courses on. And I spent a lot of time on governance because I saw all these wonderful nonprofits that would do great things and they would fall apart because of the conflict among the founders, the board members, the staff. And once we got into the vitiligo and the HS space, the challenges were so overwhelming. HS was just, it would break your heart every time you walked in the room to the point where you just couldn't even engage Well, working with homelessness, working with immigrant rights, working with civic engagement for people who don't speak English, and all these other areas, you see pain there, and then you see groups from making a big difference. And so then you start applying those to dermatology, and you realize, wow, I can learn from our nonprofit sector, but I can help my patients. And I saw a lot of great leadership in the nonprofit sector across the board. I mean, nonprofits, I think, are only like 5 to 10% of the entire US economy, but the big sparks come from them. So I would encourage all of us who have some time to spend time on your favorite nonprofit, but go to a well-governed nonprofit. That doesn't always mean big. It just means it has a set of processes, it has a culture of collaboration, it's very mission driven, so it's worked out the goals of the organization. And then you can get to a great place because there's a whole ecosystem of people who are willing to help you. So Hadar and I worked with a woman named Gatsby Brown to devise the strategic plan for the HS Foundation. She was incredible, and I met her through, some of the work that's going on with the urban space. And it was one of those elements that if you can work with those people, you'll learn how to get things done. And oftentimes we can't measure what we want to get done. We just want to say, I want to make it better for my HS patient. I'm sick and tired of them not even getting dressings covered. I want to advance the science. Well, sometimes the nonprofits force you to say, okay, what is the change you want to make? And what are the 1 million steps you have to take to get there? And then how can I do that with $4? And they do it. They do it every single day. So I think those are the things where I found leadership, I found inspiration. And then the other thing, our own specialty, I was so lucky to be in Vancouver with Harvey Louis and then in Detroit with Henry Lim. When you see people who live and breathe our specialty and care about all people and care about everybody who suffers from skin diseases, as well as the people who care for those people, and they don't do it, they get recognized, of course, but they don't always do it for the recognition. You're like, I want to be like that guy. I want to be like that woman. I want to be like that person. And all those things kind of came together. And by the time I got into a position of being part of a group that can lead, I took all those experiences and tried to apply them the best I could. There's also the passion. And then lastly is burnout. There's a lot of pain in dermatology. We discount it, but how many times have you seen a patient with severe keloids, alopecia areata, severe atopic dermatitis, multiple skin cancers, advanced melanoma, CTCL, and you just don't want to see it anymore? Or the patient who can't even afford the basic acne treatments. Well, for me, I cope with that pain, some people call it moral injury, by working in the nonprofit space. And I feel like, okay, at least I was witness to this pain. I tried to change one thing about it. And those all kind of come together. And that's how I kind of got in this space.
Wow, thank you for this overview, Ilt, and thank you for all your leadership, regardless of the field. And, they say the doctors are leaders in their community, or leaders for their patients, leaders in their field. And I think it's true. And I think you really exemplify that beautifully. And with that, I want to thank you for your time, your expertise, for everything you do. I know I'm inspired and learning from you and with you every day. So thank you for that. And I hope that people who are listening are just a little bit more inspired today to go on and design the career that will make an impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Hadar. Thank you, Raja.
Hey, Raja, do you know where the integrative medicine movement started?
According to Google, since Google knows everything, Dr. Andrew Weil founded the Center for Integrative Medicine at the University of Arizona in Tucson back in 1994. Why do you ask?
Well, you know how we always try to get to the root cause? I think we need to go big for the fifth annual Integrative Dermatology Symposium. How about we do this? Let's meet at the Los Ventana Canyon Resort in Tucson, Arizona. Or you can join virtually from September 30th to October 2nd and hear from the world-renowned experts like Andrew Weil.
Exciting. And our theme is connecting mind, body, and spirit to take a more holistic approach to our patient care. What do you say?
Absolutely. I mean, where else can you get the latest on diet and dermatology, hypnosis, botanicals, common diseases, aesthetics, and other unique topics in dermatology with practical takeaways to start using in clinic right away?
So true. And let's not forget, we've got the new track for estheticians too. I think I'm going to need to call in a sick day or two before the symposium so I can enjoy the waterfall and trails on the resort, stargaze, play a round or two of golf or tennis, relax at the spa, and catch up with colleagues at the evening receptions.
Yes, that place is spectacular. Use our discount code POD25 at checkout for 25% off.